education class. This is the 12th year we've had continuing education. Can you believe that? Time flies. And so we're glad you're here today, and we hope that just like all of our classes, you go take something back to your dealership that will help you, that will make sure that you're in compliance with the law, and that you're you're doing the things you're supposed to be doing as a dealer. As you know, there's a lot of that, a lot of things you have to do to be in compliance with the law. So it's important that we get together annually and make sure that we all follow that process. Excuse me. In your packet, there is a list of bills and so forth, and we're going to go through, start in your big packet first. It says 3-hour education class. It's the one that's stapled on the corner. I put in the usual things that we typically do in our education class. If you look at page 2, this is our official welcome, but we remind you of antitrust violations. We're not here to talk about things that are of an antitrust nature. We talk about things, you can't talk about things such as boycotting or price fixing or those types of things. And the purpose of this education class is exactly that, to educate you on the rules and regulations that you're under the different government entities that you have that have jurisdiction over us. So we remind you to read that antitrust statement, make sure that you're in compliance with that. On page 3 is our copyright policy. We keep mentioning that to everybody because there are those who still like to take our proprietary information and copy it without our permission. We have had several instances where we've had to send some pretty nasty letters to people who are doing that. So we ask you to do that. Selling our forms and our proprietary information is something that we use. The revenue from that is used to help support you on Capitol Hill. And so we ask you to continue to support us and do those. And also it's against the law, by the way, to do that. So on page 4, it talks about your role in this. One of the most important things that you can consider is to make sure you're involved legislatively. How many in here know who your legislator is? Any of you not know who your legislator is? Okay, that's important for you to find out. And how you find that out, if you will go to the government's website, it's the state website, it's le.utah.gov. And if you go right on that main page of that where it pulls it up, right down at the very bottom, you can type in your address for your home, and it'll tell you exactly who your House member is, who represents you, and who your senator is. And it's important for you to do that because as we have big issues come up, I may call everybody or send you an email and saying, you need to call your senator or your representative because they have a bill that says this, and that's going to hurt you. And all you have to do is send them an email and say, vote no on this bill or vote yes on this bill, whatever the case may be. So it's not necessary to have a big, broad understanding even of the subject, but to tell your representative or your senator what you want to have done with this because it's your livelihood. And you're the one that has the most influence on there. I'm just an educator for them up there. I let them know how things happen in the industry and what processes are because they don't understand that. So if you don't know who your legislator is, make sure that you find out. I'm always amazed, and I say this every year, I'm always amazed every year at how many bills are passed because one person contacted their legislator and said, there ought to be a law against this, or we need a law to protect people, or whatever the case may be. So it's important for you to do that. So if you'll go to that state website, that will take place. This year was a very busy year at the legislature. On some bases, the legislature passed over 500 bills this year. In fact, many groups were encouraged not to file bills this year because there were so many bill requests, a record number. I think there was over 1,200, almost 1,300 bills that people had requested. So there was quite a backlog in legislative research and general counsel where all the language is put together, and they asked people, unless you really need this, do it next year. So I think next year is going to be a pretty busy year. The overall session for us this year was pretty quiet. As I mentioned earlier, the session was very quiet from the standpoint that we didn't have a lot of motor vehicle bills or things that were related to the motor vehicle. It's probably the quietest in about 10 years. And that's a good thing in my book. The less we have that people want to push things onto us or regulate us more is a good thing. We were able to do some pretty good positive things as a result of that. There were some bills that came up that we were able to have influence on, to tweak and to put language in there that supports and helps our industry. Every year there's going to be something going on that somebody wants to do either to us or for us. And so we need to make sure we have representation there. And that's why we have an association. You know, a association is a group of people with common interests, in this case the auto industry, and we go there to represent you. And understand that we are the only voice on Capitol Hill for you. So you need to understand that. Before we get into the first bill, one of the things that we spent a lot of time on, which is not in this packet, it's in a separate survey. In this survey, it talks about our dealer bond. This is kind of a carryover from last year's session. As you remember, for the last 2 sessions, there's been a push to increase our dealer bond to over $200,000. This is not just, you know, somebody's whim. This is a real thing that's coming from financial institutions that said, we've had too many losses, we want to put some more restrictions on dealers for title delivery, and if they don't deliver title, then the bond needs to be bigger so that if we suffer losses, we get paid, and the consumer is not left holding the bag. So, but the big push has been by financial institutions. So one of the things we have to solve this year is we have made commitments over the last 2 years, and all during last year, an interim study. The legislature meets on a monthly basis the rest of the year. The session isn't just during that 45-day session, but they also meet starting in April. They meet once a month in like a joint transportation committee, and in that we testified this past summer about the dealer bond, and that all the things that we had done over the last probably 10 years to influence the dealer bond, to change what it covers. Before, the dealer bond was so encompassing and so broad, if you sneezed wrong, somebody could make a claim on your bond. So we have narrowed it down to title delivery only. We have narrowed a lot of the things that can take place, but the fact still remains it's only a $75,000 bond. As we went through that process and working with the insurance companies, one of the issues that we found out about is even if somebody wants to increase the bond further than the $75,000 bond now, there's not an insurance company in Utah that will write anything larger than $75,000. They told us directly, specifically, that if it goes to $100,000, we will not write bonds. We're not willing to accept that risk in there. So the question remains for the industry, what are we going to do to solve that problem? Because now the ball is in our court. The bond isn't going to solve the problem. What are we going to do? We've come up with, in the survey, and this will be in your survey question that you can answer, but we boiled this down as we talked with our board of directors. We boiled this down to basically to 4 options. And the options are to increase the bond amount, which we already talked about, which probably isn't feasible unless we come up with our own bonding company or something to control that. The second option would be to do a state recovery fund. That is done in some states where you pay into a state fund, the state holds the funds, and that fund builds up over time as dealers pay an amount every year to that fund, and when there's losses that the bond doesn't cover, then they can pay that money out of that recovery fund. Every state that's done that has had quite a few problems with that, though, in the fact that when the fund starts getting to a certain level, it's kind of like your kids raiding their piggy banks. As soon as it gets a lot in there, they want to break it open and spend it. Our government is no different. They see, you know, $1 million or $2 million in there, so they'll take that money and they'll rape and pillage it out of that fund and go use it in the general fund somewhere. And so that's typically the scenario that happens with recovery funds, but that is an option that we could look at as well. The third option is to do a title guarantee policy where we could, through either insurance or a title product, write an additional product on top of your bond that says if a dealer goes out of business, the bond is completely paid, you know, the $75,000 amount is exhausted, then this would be a specific policy that would apply only to consumers that could be paid like an insurance policy, kind of like when you buy a home, you know, you have to buy title insurance for that vehicle, or excuse me, for that home. Okay, we're looking at maybe doing something parallel to that. And then the other one is title in hand. There are many states who are a title in hand state that say you cannot offer a vehicle for sale on a retail basis unless you physically have the title in your dealership or it's verified at a flooring company or a finance company where you may have that group of vehicles financed. Those are all have many different pros and cons. In the survey that we're going to ask you to fill out, we have listed the points for and against each one of these options that are in there, and we're asking for you to give us direction on which option you like best or that you think is the worst. And of course, the fifth option is other. Maybe you have another option we have not even thought about. Okay, so part of your education class will be filling out this survey form so we can get some direction from you. We have also in the survey asked several questions about what you're doing for your internet stuff, because we're working on some things to help with internet sales, and that's going to be a big discussion concerning internet sales and what you can and can't do with internet sales too. So part of the class is to make sure you fill out the survey form and make sure that you give us some good input back, because we are going to look at what you want to do. This is not what Wayne Jones wants to do or necessarily your board of directors. We're going to gather all this information. We're going to present it to the board and say, this is what the dealers want to do. And then I think we have due diligence to be able to make sure that we do that. So one of the things we ask you, most importantly, is that you take that information, think about it very seriously, and give us your input. Because those who respond are the ones we're going to listen to and follow the process. As you know, unfortunately, the world's run about by the ones that show up. That's typically about 20%. Okay. Make sure you're one of the ones that show up and give us your information back. So any questions about that? I'll make sure you have those. Yeah, they'll be part of the class. So so let's go back to your book and your handout that you have over on page 6. Excuse me, on page 5. I'm sorry, I skipped page 5. This salvage bill was probably the biggest bill we had to deal with on the Hill this year. As you know, salvage keeps coming up every year, and every year we're looking at this. This salvage issue is specifically focused at auto auctions, particularly the salvage auctions like the IAA Copart type of auctions out there that are selling branded vehicles. They're usually insurance settlements, that sort of thing. And I know there's a fairly sizable amount of dealers who do sell salvage vehicles, which is a part of the marketing of used cars. One of the things that we've always had a problem with, and if you remember from last year's class, we had a problem with people who own a business who can go to the salvage yard or the salvage sales, buy up to 5 vehicles and bring them back to their business, fix them up and sell them. We put some more we didn't, but there was a bill on salvage, and so as part of that we were able to put some input in this to help stop this curbing issue, because the problems we deal with are those who go there and sell those, and then they sell them without a license out on the corners, and then you have unsuspecting consumers who are buying these who aren't told that they're salvage. So we made some changes in this. If you look at page 5, at the very top, it talks about a non-repairable certificate. And this is something you need to pay close attention to, because if you're at the auction and it says it has a branded title, be sure and understand what type of a branded title it has, because if it's a non-repairable vehicle salvage title, you cannot register it for the road. Okay, you can't register it for the road. If it says rebuilt, restored, salvage, that's fine, you can, but if it says non-repairable is the key word. And that will apply to every vehicle, whether it's a boat, whether it's whatever kind it is. I know boats don't go on the road, so that's probably not a good example, but you know what I mean. So you need to make sure you pay attention to that. I'm sorry? They come just like any other title, just like a salvage title or anybody. It's just another title brand that we have in the state of Utah as a non-repairable vehicle. That came into play last year. That's when we first started seeing non-repairable salvage certificates. Okay, we put in here that if you look at the third bullet point down in the bill, it says that you cannot sell a vehicle, a non-repairable or salvaged vehicle, unless it is certificated in Utah. Okay, let me explain that a little bit. What's happening is the salvage guys are establishing themselves out of state. They buy salvage on the internet. They take this Utah salvage title, they take it to Wyoming or Nebraska or wherever it is. They take it there and then they send it back through Utah, circumventing the law. This does not allow them. They actually have to title the vehicle in Utah to be able to resell it in Utah. So that does not allow them to circumvent the law. There was also provision in here concerning if you've been convicted of motor vehicle criminal offenses, you cannot get a license to buy salvage. It also says in there that if you remember, if you're a business trying to buy in the salvage sales, you cannot bid on more than or buy more than 5 vehicles in any 12-month period. That was strengthened in this as well. At the bottom of this, we strengthen the penalties so that we have more enforcement on this, so it's worthwhile for a county attorney to prosecute these people who are violating the law. We increase the penalty for that, and we also if a person violates the law and they did 5 vehicles, it's 5 different felonies, if you will. Okay, so we changed the penalties to make sure that that's there. Again, my reminder to you on the bottom of the page is make sure you pay attention to your title brands now with that new non-repairable title brand. Okay, and if you have questions, please stop me. House Bill 291 is motor vehicle safety inspection. Gosh, it wouldn't be a session at the Capitol if we didn't deal with safety inspection, right? Because of the change in inspection, and all of you know that there's a new schedule out for safety inspections. It's not as frequent as it used to be, and if you need a copy of that, you can obtain that from our office through IDS to get a copy of that for what vehicles are required when. And remember that just because the safety is required in that model year doesn't necessarily mean the emissions is required, and vice versa. They do not parallel anymore like they used to, thanks to our wonderful legislative session. One of the things that came up is that under Motor Vehicle Enforcement Code and the Safety Inspection Code, there became a discrepancy. So this bill was a fix-it bill. If you look at where it says 41-3-303 temporary permits, it talks about the frequency of a safety inspection. And you can see that they struck out the word 6 and inserted 11 months. Your safety inspections are now good for 11 months if they're issued in the name of the dealership or you're a bonded dealer. Okay, so so don't think that your safety inspection certificates will expire in 6 months like they used to. That's a change. They're now good longer, up to 11 months. A lot of discussion whether that's good or bad, but that's what the law says. This change is to parallel it with the existing law that passed last year. Okay, I also put in here, and by the way, if you want to know when all this stuff goes into effect, you'll see that there's an effective date on every bill. Some of them are different than others. They don't all go into effect. In fact, in the middle of May, you'll hear on the news that 327 or whatever bills are going, or laws are going into effect today, and they usually pick one. That's because that's 60 days after the legislative session. That's one of the main implementation dates. But I put a date on your handout so that you know exactly what date those go into effect. On the bottom of page 6, I also put in here, because we've had a lot of questions on temporary permits about the process for temporary permits and when you have to do them, when you don't have to do them, so on and so forth. So I'll let you read that on your own occasion. On House Bill 210, this is a motor vehicle emissions amendments bill, and this had to do with emissions as it relates to the county. And this is on page 7. On page 7, it talks about the emissions and under our program, it's different than many states in the United States. Usually they have a state I&M program. Ours is actually a county I&M. Each county is over their jurisdiction for whatever their emission problem is in their state. One of the things that the passage of this bill causes problems with is, in fact, that now we're going to have to work with each one of the emission counties, of which there's 4 of, for what their standards are. So they could forward go and say, we want emissions to be done more frequently or less frequently. One of the things that we will make sure that we protect your interest in is if you're in, for example, Davis County, and someone comes up from Salt Lake County to your Davis County emissions, you shouldn't have to be able to hurry and have to go emission that car to Salt Lake County standards, which is the way it is now. If you emission your car in the county in which you're in, you can sell it in that emission county with that Davis County emissions in this case that I cited, even though they lived in Salt Lake County. Everybody understand how that works? Now, the customer who buys that car, the next year they have to emission it, or even say emissions is the big thing. They have to emissions that vehicle in the county in which they reside. They can't do it in where they work. So if somebody lives in Utah County and they drive to Salt Lake County, they can't run their car over to a Salt Lake County emission stations while they're at work. It has to be done to the county specification which the vehicle is registered. Okay? Questions about that?
It used to be like that.
We've never had it like that. We've always protected that. So you could always sell a vehicle without having to do another county emissions on the vehicle. Yeah. That was kind of a misnomer, probably a number of years ago, where people were that understanding that if they came from a certain county, they had to do that. They had to perform that. Now, it's a different situation if you sell it in St. George and you live in Salt Lake County. So if I'm in St. George, my car breaks down, I trade it in, they sell me a car, then it becomes my responsibility, because they're a non-emission county, it's my responsibility within, I believe it's 10 days, don't quote me on that, but I think it's within 10 days, I have to have it emissioned, and that emission sent to the motor vehicle division to show that it complies. But it's not the dealer in that county's responsibility to do that, because they don't have the emission equipment anyway. Okay?
So
Other?
Effective July 1st?
Yeah, it'll be effective July 1st, yes. And what that's going to mean to you is that not a lot, other than the fact that you may see some changes coming from your county. Now that goes back to my point of legislative and knowing your legislators. I don't know how many of you are involved on a local basis with your county commissioners and county mayors and that sort of thing, and which county you're living in. But you need to make sure that you have a relationship with them too, because those are the people we're going to have to work with on this subject. Okay. Transportation amendments. This is also a flaw in the safety inspection bill because there was an issue concerning vehicles that are 10,000 pounds or more. If it's 10,000 pounds or more, it has to be registered and safety inspected annually. Well, if you have a large SUV, it's going to fall in that excess of 10,000 pounds, right? So that meant you were going to have to do that. Or if it's a commercial vehicle, that also has impact into that issue. We fixed that, so it's only if it's a commercial vehicle, you still have to follow the annual safety inspection basis. So if it's a consumer buying a car, it's just like it's always been, no change. Okay. Let's see, over the page on page 8, motor vehicle registration and insurance. This is a identity fraud bill. What had been happening, to give you the background in this, is that the new registration cards that are going to be coming out after July 1st are going to be, and actually November 1st, as you'll see, there's 2 implementation dates on here, but after October 1st, so November 1st, what's going to happen is there will be no more address for the person whose vehicle is registered. And the background of this is there's a kind of a theft ring going on out there that when people go over to the store or they go to a funeral or they go into the movie, people break into the car, but they don't take anything. They just go in and get the address off the registration or the insurance card. They run over to their house because they know the people are in the theater watching a movie. And that's how they're breaking into homes where they or typically would not have anybody home or less chance of somebody being home. So this representative asked that the addresses be taken off. Now that may be a little problematic for you to verify ownership, so that's one more thing you're going to have to pay attention to. Not only does it include the registration card, but July of 14 will also include the insurance card. So they gave an extra year for the insurance companies to update their data and that sort of thing. So because of the length of time, they didn't want to have to issue new insurance cards to everybody out there after November 1st. So they put a second implementation date on this for the insurance card. Now cannot have the address written on there. Okay. It wouldn't be a year at the legislature also if we didn't have any vanity plates to talk about. I put the first one in here, which is kind of a fix-it bill. It says that on any type of organization plate for a vanity plate, if they don't maintain at least 500 license plates over a 3-year consecutive period, then the state can withdraw that. So for example, if the child education plate or the Boy Scout plate, if they don't maintain a minimum of 500 plates, then that's going to be pulled to help cut the cost for the state, because there, some of the ones that came in years ago, there were so few of them, and now the Motor Vehicle Division has to send out decals to every county office and our office. You imagine how much that is to stock decals, even though there's not a lot of them. You still have to have some in every office. So it was costing the DMV quite a bit of money to print those. So this eliminates that by saying you have to at least maintain 500 plates over a 3-year period. There is one more new plate that came about, that they already have quite a few plates already pre-registered, and that's why this passed. There's now a new In God We Trust plate. Okay, this was done as part of the Freedom Festival. It actually came about because a Boy Scout wanted to have an In God We Trust plate. And he went to his legislator and said, I think we need a vanity plate for In God We Trust. And that's, again, to my point, one person can get a bill passed. Okay? This was actually heard in an interim committee meeting during the summer, had a lot of discussion. It was very, very interesting. And I'm not going to go into where all the money goes for those, but interesting discussion. If there's any of you who do rental, on the next House Bill 379, if any of you are renting vehicles, you need to make sure you follow up with a call to us. There's going to be a new process or a new decal developed for car rental companies. Part of the problem they had is they would do a 6-month or a 12-month registration on a vehicle, and then they would or only do a 6-month registration. Maybe they wanted to keep it 8 months. This is going to be a decal for the life of that vehicle as long as it's in the rental fleet of the rental car company. So there's going to be changes. This would affect people like Enterprise and Hertz and all those large rental, and even the independent rentals too. So if you're doing independent rentals and you want to put a plate on a vehicle with a decal that's good as long as you have that in there, it might be a year, it might be 2, it might be 3, I don't know. Depends on how long you're keeping it. Typically that's not the case, but this would allow you a decal where you pay one time and it stays on that rental car for as long as it is registered to the rental company. Okay? Over on page 10 is a consumer protection bill. This has to do with charging surcharges on credit cards. And rather than getting into a lot of complicated things as far as surcharges on rent on using a credit card to buy a car, this has to do anything that you've been doing. So if you're taking a credit card, do everything the same way you've been doing, assuming you're following the law. But it's under the Department of Commerce, and so if you add the cost of the credit card on there, the only thing I really caution, the reason I put this in here, I wasn't going to, but the reason I put it in here is because sometimes when you're selling lower end vehicles, and somebody says, "Can I put this, $3,000, this $8,000 vehicle on my credit card because I love the points," right? You stand a chance that that car can be that credit card charge will kick back to you. Okay. The one thing you need to make sure of on credit card charges and when you can charge additional fees based on the service you use. Some credit card companies that set up for you to take credit cards do not allow you to add fees to the sale price of the vehicle. So this is going to be subject to the credit card company you're using if in fact you're using credit cards. Okay. Bottom of page 10 is the motor vehicle event data recorders. This was in the news a lot during last summer and into the fall. This has to do with data recorders that they're now putting in cars that tell how fast the car is going and all these different things about the vehicle. And the question was whether that information was proprietary to the owner or not. So the legislature decided that it is proprietary to the vehicle purchaser that owns that vehicle. And that insurance companies can't take that information and use it against them when there's an insurance loss. So if they get in a crash, the insurance company can't just automatically get in and tap into that recorder and say, well, you were at fault. We know because you were going 45 miles an hour in a 40-mile-an-hour zone. So this fixes that. The reason I put this bill in here more importantly is that some of you who are doing buy here, pay here are putting tracking devices in there. So if somebody decides not to pay, you can put these GPS units or other tracking devices in those cars and be able to track that. So if somebody decides not to make their payment for a month or two, you can find out where that vehicle is. You need to make sure that you get the disclosure from the company that you're using for that service and make sure that you give the proper documentation to the person who is purchasing that vehicle. You cannot put those devices on the car without the consumer's knowledge. And your company that you use will work with that. Okay? Senate Bill 196 is a license plate reader amendment. This is I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there is actually a device out there that motor vehicle enforcement has used for years and years, and it's very interesting to see how it works. I've been on demonstration projects with them where we actually go out in the motor vehicle enforcement division's cars and they drive down the road or through a parking lot, and within milliseconds it'll read the plate on the vehicle, either the front or the back plate, and it'll tell whether that vehicle's been reported stolen or if it's some information about that. There was a lot of discussion about this of whether that invades the rights of people to be able to do license plate readers or not. Not getting into all the details of that, this bill did pass that allows for license plate readers to be used. It especially can be used when there is a kidnapping, when they do Amber Alerts, that sort of thing. It will really help with that. But the interesting part for us is that we're typically, people are going to steal cars. Where do they go? Well, they go to a place where there's a lot of cars, the dealerships. And so this license plate reader program will actually help recover more stolen vehicles for the dealers out there too. So that will actually be a benefit for you if you have a problem. Anybody have any major problems with car thefts? Anybody had a car stolen lately off your lot? Good, I'm glad to hear that. On page 12, Senate Bill 35 is a business bill. I know it's a pain in the neck sometimes when you get that notice that the county wants taxes on all your desks and furniture and typewriters, there's an old term, computers, any office equipment, chairs, you have to pay a tax on that, right? Tangible personal property tax. The minimum on that before was $3,500. If the value of that was under $3,500, then you didn't have to make a filing with the county. That amount got raised this year to $10,000. So that may help a lot of you for that taxation on your business property. Any questions so far? We've been moving along very quickly. Page 12, bottom, towing amendments. Towing amendments have been in the news a lot. If you've watched any news, you've seen these sting operations where they're watching guys who are hooking cars because the guy parked in, ABC sandwich shop and they're going into the business building. It's really humorous to me. I kind of chuckle every time. But apparently these guys are being pretty predatory with that. They sit and wait and watch. So they passed a bill that does not allow that, some of those processes to be done. One of the biggest problems was that these guys who are doing this on a predatory basis, when they hook the car, the only way you got it unhooked is if you paid cash, and a lot of times they're around $300, okay? Well, who has $300 in their pocket? You know, in our credit card days these days, I don't know of anybody who carries $300 in their pocket. I certainly don't. So this requires the towing company to have to accept a credit card or a debit card as well as cash, which will help. And then there's a whole list of things that a lot of the jurisdiction now is going to be over the county or the municipality in which the towing company resides or has their business at. So that means that we're going to see a lot of input from the cities that say, here are the city rules that we require as a city. So they can vary by city to city to city to county to whatever the case may be. So that will change. If you're doing towing, you'll want to pay special attention to that. Page 13 is Senate Bill 193. This is a vehicle registration. This is really an off-highway vehicle bill. We've had situations that were brought up that said a person went into a power sport dealer and bought an ATV. They take it home and convert it into a street legal ATV. When they registered as a street legal ATV, they had to pay the fees and the registrations a second time. If in fact they do this and change it from an off-highway to a street legal, if they do it within 30 days, they don't have to pay those charges twice. So they give them a time period in which to do that. So if you're going to do that, you probably need to hurry. Okay, got 30 days to do that. Let me just mention that really is all the legislative bills. Believe it or not, it's kind of a shock, isn't it? Usually we spend a lot more time on legislative bills. One of the things that's changing that we've been working on for a long time, and that is the vehicle application for title. Some of you have heard, I'm sure most of you had, that there's a change with that. We've had problems when it initially came out that some of the county offices were rejecting paperwork if you didn't use the new form. That is not the case. If any of you have had rejected paperwork because of that, I need to know about that, because that county office or wherever you're getting it done is not supposed to do that. Okay? You can still use your old forms. What the change is on here is, well, let me address the issue of why they changed it. If I go and register a vehicle in my name, I can put it as W. Jones, okay, and register it to W. Jones. I can also register that vehicle as Wayne Jones, or I can register as Wayne G. Jones, or I can put my wife's name on there. So there's like 4 different ways that I can register it for me and my wife. What's happening is the system is becoming so overloaded with duplicate people on there, what they're asking for, and instead of using social security numbers, which they are smart not to, but instead of using socials, they're using driver's license numbers. Now, that asks for a driver's license number if it's for a person. If it's being purchased for a business, there's an EIN number, an employee identification number, or an employer identification number. That should be on there. They are not this. They're really giving us, and this is a verbal commitment by the Department of Motor Vehicles, says that they will not reject paperwork because you're still using your old forms up. They're going to give us till October to do that, so that hopefully would give you plenty of time. Hopefully you're going to use all that up and plenty more, because hopefully business will be that good. But starting in October, you really need to move to the new form, or they may start rejecting it. I've said they will for sure, but you need to just look at that focus date as October 1st, using the new dealer application for title. And it's not really a dealer application for title. You remember there was a dealer application and a consumer application. It is all one now. There's just a vehicle application for title. If you register boats, okay, boats are registered on its own form, okay? So watercraft are on their own vehicle applicator. They're not on this form. So don't use this and write in vessel or boat or whatever you're doing, okay? That's on a separate form. One of the things that we did on the form, and part of the reason is that we can't, we have to expand the length of the form to get boats and everything else on here, because we did expand it so we could collect the proper information. For example, on trailers, it asks specifically what kind of trailer, whether it's a utility trailer, a tent trailer, travel trailer, or other. Not only does it ask the kind, but it asks the length, okay? It also, on heavy trucks, you have to put the weight in there if it's one of the heavy truck registrations. The reason we're gathering that information, particularly like on motorhomes it asks if it's a Class A or a Class B or a Class C. It asks you to put the class in there. One of the reasons we're doing it specifically on motorhomes is because we have to collect some data, because motorhomes are still on the old fee in lieu basis instead of the age-based program. We got to gather data so that we can do a age-based program for motorhomes, and this will help us gather that data, which should be disclosed anyway. We have these available in the IDS offices for you already, so if you want to change now, you can. So you can get them programmed into your computer, but it's at your convenience to do that. But again, we highly recommend that you do that sometime between now and October. So use up your old forms. When you get out of those forms, it might be a good time to get your computer guy in there, reprogram the new form, and get that into your system. These come in both 2- and 3-part forms for you too. If you want a single form, you can get them off the state's website, but I don't know anybody who wants a single form. Okay?
I've got a question on that.
Yes, go ahead.
On the lien holder, it has the EIN as that.
Yes.
And how the hell are we going to know all these people's EIN numbers? Mandatory thing?
Yeah, what will happen is they're having the same problem, like how many branches of Zions Bank are there?
Yeah.
Okay? So when you finance with that, your finance company is supposed to be giving you that information so you can just write it on there. So if it's Mountain America or America First or Zions or Wells Fargo or whoever it is, that will be there. Again, that's going to be a process that's going to take place, because once we get that process, and because a lot of them, like the credit unions like Mountain America, America First, they'll have one number there. So once you get that number, it's good. It doesn't matter what branch they went to finance it or through the dealership. Yeah, just get that from them. And it'll probably be, we're hoping and working with the League of Credit Unions and the Bankers Association that they will give that information to us so we can pass that on to you. If you do financing through this financial institution, this is the number. And we should hopefully eventually have a list downstairs that will help with that so that we don't have to reject your paperwork. And I don't think there's going to be as sticky on that as they will be on the personal one come October 1st. So more will be coming on that. As we always know, during the course of the year, things tend to change and wiggle a little bit. So stay tuned. Let's finish up this part under the page 14, the privacy policy disclosure. That is something that has to be customized to your dealership, and it's to declare your how you treat your customers' non-public personal information. So if you're not doing that, last year's handout had a lot of information on that, on what you need to do to develop your own privacy policy. There was a survey or a form to fill out that asked a series of questions. Based on the answers to those questions, we could then develop the form for you. So rather than you having to chase to an attorney, now understand we're not legal counsel, but instead of chasing to an attorney to have that done, which is really not hard to do, it's not rocket science. But if you answer these questions, we can develop your own custom form for you to make sure you're in compliance with the non-public personal information or the privacy policy that is out there, both federally and state, that you have to follow. So you need to make sure that you cover both of those. Over on the page, on page 14, I'm not going to go down through all of these. These are some reminders about advertising. Advertising continues to be the problem. In fact, that's where motor vehicle enforcement is spending a lot of time, because dealers continue to advertise wrong. You can see on the very top bullet point there that the penalties are still pretty steep. They're $250 for your first offense, $1,000 for your second, and $5,000 for your third offense. And that's in any 12-month period. So just because they come out once and then leave, if they come back a second time, the penalty is going to be $1,000. Okay, so you need to make sure that you follow the advertising regs. So what I did is I put in here, there's the law of advertising that says, if you look over on page 16 in the bold type on the top, that is the prohibited part. If you look at 41.3-210, it says prohibitions and requirements. This is the prohibitive acts section of the motor vehicle code. I put the whole prohibitive acts section in here so that you could read it as a reminder, because as you can see over the next 3 or 4 pages, the list is rather lengthy. But the top part deals with intentionally publishing or displaying or having inaccurate advertising information. So I'm going to skip over page 17, 18, and 19, and I'm going to go to page 20. So those pages you can read on your own and look at to make sure you're in compliance with the law. On page 20, this has to do with rules. As legislation is passed, the Tax Commission passes rules to clarify what it says in the law. It says you can't do misleading advertising. Well, what does that mean specifically? That's what the set of rules is listed here. So if you look under R87723V-7, that's the rule that applies to advertising. And I'm not going to get into every one of these details, but there are a couple I'd like to highlight. The first part of these are what is an advertisement, okay, and it defines what that is. If you turn over the page to page 21, and I'm pointing out the ones that motor vehicle enforcement is spending a lot of time on enforcing. Okay, the first one is a reminder about advertising and what has to be in the advertising. So if you look at price on the bottom page 20 and over on page 21, it talks about what should be advertised as far as price in your advertisement. On number B on top of page 21, it talks about the fees that are not required to be in there. Example is your dock fees, undercoating and rust proofing, your safety inspection fees, waste tire recycling, and then down in 4, if you don't put a temporary permit, or if you do put a temporary permit, the cost of temporary permit is not included. So there's a list of things that are not included in your advertising. The things that are included are in the paragraph before that. The halfway down the page in paragraph D, it talks about savings and discounts, and this has to do with the was now issue. Now let me just stop right here for a second, because here's what I'd like you to do, and this is your assignment if you would. And you can add this to your survey or just send us an email, whatever you want. I would like you to go through these advertising rules, because we are going to, sometime during the summertime, we're going to go with a list to the tax commissioners and say, these are the things we want changed in the advertising regulations. These haven't been addressed for a number of years, and we need to be able to say, we like this or we don't like this. So I can't tell them what you want if you don't respond to me. We have a list of some things that we put together, but I want to hear from you about if there's things in here that are ridiculous, or if you keep getting fined for this and you think it has no impact, tell us. I don't care. But we need some input back from you. A lot of these are very important. The first one in D, about halfway down on page 21, is the savings and discount claim of was now. Okay? One of the things that's been discussed is every state around us uses the was now stickers in their cars. Why shouldn't we be able to do that? The question is because there are those who abuse it. So if we put some parameters into the was now issue, then we need to look at that again. So there's been suggestions that as a dealer, if I have a vehicle in my inventory and I advertise it for $89.95, and I've had it in a legitimate ad that I can show on my website or internet or newspaper or wherever you're advertising, if I change that to say it was this and now this, as long as I can verify it from an ad that I did, why shouldn't I be able to do that? Because where the abuse comes is the guy says, this car was $18,995 and now it's $89.95. And the guy says, well, I can justify that. It was $14,000 when it was brand new, and now it's this. And that's kind of a deceptive, so it's always the ones that kind of skirt outside the line that cause the problems. So the question is, can we legitimately put something through that says, here's a viable way that we can do was now without being misrepresented to the consumer? Again, under D, under I, the word wholesale may not be used, so remember, I see that periodically. Sometimes dealers will put an ad in the newspaper. I've seen several of these where they'll put an ad in the newspaper and it looks like an advertisement instead, or excuse me, it looks like an editorial instead of an advertisement, but on the top it says advertisement on it, and it'll talk about selling wholesale to the public as part of the text in there. You cannot do that. That's against the law. Down payments, we could talk about down payments from a number of different aspects, but you can advertise that you can buy with no money down, if in fact you can do that. So if somebody says no down payments or no carrying charge, whatever it is, if you say no down payment, I need to be able to come into your dealership and not have to get my wallet out or my checkbook. Okay, so if you say no money down, it means I don't have to get any finances out. Okay, the bottom one is finance again. No finance charges, carrying charges, or similar things. Over on the next page, on page 22, the phrase, we will pay off your trade no matter what you owe. Do you remember our class from last year about that? What does that relate to? If you remember last year, there was a big federal case about that where it has to do with negative equity. Okay, because if somebody, typically that applies to a guy who owes $18,000 on his car and it's only worth $15,000, so you take that $3,000 and you roll it over into the new loan. You need to make sure that you follow the federal statute on that to make sure that the disclosure is done properly and that you disclose the negative equity in that. And typically the red flag goes up is if you're advertising, we will pay off your trade no matter what you owe, that's where the red flag will come up. Okay, so don't do, besides not, you can't do it, don't do it. Okay. A lot of the stuff on, clear down to the bottom of the page is on demonstrator stuff. Mileage statements, I don't need to mention too much about that. Make sure the mileage is represented so that if it's out on test drive, it doesn't change over the advertised mileage. Page 23, second item down, is the word free. If you're going to offer something free in your dealership, it cannot be based on a purchase or something else. Free is free. It's not conditional. Okay, so free is free. Leasing. We see this all the time, particularly on the new car side, but if there are more and more now dealers who are leasing vehicles, leasing used cars. If you advertise a vehicle that is for lease, it has to be clearly identified that it is a lease payment or a lease process that you're in, okay? So make sure that you disclose lease on there. And that lease has to be in a prominent position. You just can't put it in the little fine print down there. Number T, a little further down the page, talks about electronic medium disclosures. If you're doing advertising electronic, which I'm sure all of you do, make sure you pay attention to that. Price equaling, we can equal anybody's price. That's problematic as well. And again, these things I'm pointing out to you are things that the Motor Vehicle Enforcement Division is paying particular attention to and asked us to make sure that you understood these. So my recommendation to you is to go back and read every single one of these advertising rules and making sure that you're complying. Now, if you use an advertising agency or somebody or your brother-in-law does your ads for you, it doesn't matter who does them, you're responsible for your advertising. So even if you hire an ad agency, some of the new car guys and power sport dealers, RV guys, they hire ad agencies to put ads together. And if they violate the law, it still comes to you. You can't say, well, they did it, fine them. No, it doesn't work that way. It's your business, your ad, you're responsible for that. Okay? The very last one I'll mention is on the bottom of page 25, and that deals with salvage and branded titles. If you are selling a vehicle that has a branded title, you must clearly and distinctly and prominently display that in the ad. Okay? You have to do that in the ad for salvage. Any questions on advertising that you may have? Last page is to say thank you. We have a number of people in our organization of dealerships that are spend a lot of time in behalf of the industry, and those of you who give us your input. And one of the things I'm saying thanks to particularly is I know all of you will fill out the survey form and give us your input on the survey form. We want to make sure that we are representing you, because we can't represent you if we don't hear about you. I always tell the legislature every year, they always want to know who we represent, and I tell them we represent every single used car dealer out there, and every power sport dealer, and every RV dealer, because that's who we manage. And they say, well, how's that? And I said, well, all of them benefit from what we do. It's just some of them pay for it and some of them don't. So if you're not a member, you need to be. Okay? It's important for us. We can't maintain things on Capitol Hill if you don't support the industry that supports you. So if you are not a member, we ask you to join. And more importantly, if you are a member, we want to know how to best represent you. And that's why this bond issue to finish with is going to be so critical. We got to have your input. And if I have a majority of the people that say we ought to require us to be a title in hand state, that will probably be the direction we're going to go. And if that's the viable solution, or should we do an additional insurance product on top of the bond? Is that going to be the best viable option? That's your choice, not mine. All I'm going to do is present the facts, and you'll see in the survey information that we're going to give to you is that in there it gives an explanation of why this might be good and why it might be bad. So like in your election stuff, when there's a bond election for your city or something, they always put a for and against position, right? We've tried to do exactly the same thing in that survey. So read those, think about it, and then do that survey for us so that we can get that information, because we're going to do what the industry wants to do. And again, the world's run by the 20% who show up, right? Right? Who has questions for me?
When do you need those?
At your convenience, but we'd like to have them by the end of all the education classes, because all the education classes will go through June, because your license renews July 1. And that's when you have to. By the way, so that you know, we'll have your information on the state's site as we always do, but the state will not. So if anybody asks you, well, I'm just going to go down to the state and renew my license, they will not take walk-in renewals. They'll take your information and say, thank you, goodbye. Okay, so you can't renew your license in person. You just have to send the stuff. And we always suggest you do it electronically. There is one exception to that. If you have owners or salesman or anybody who is an illegal alien or someone that in that situation, you have to do that in person, because they have to go through and ask additional information and do background checks and other things. Okay, so that will be the one exception. But anybody who is in the procrastinator club in the class on June 28th is going to be pleasantly disappointed or not pleasantly, but they will be disappointed when they try to walk in and have their license renewed and walk up to do it. Okay? Any questions, comments, or otherwise? If not, thank you very much for being here today, and appreciate you being here, and have a good day.